Okay. We are live. I'll make a quick intro in Portuguese and then we'll follow up in English. Então, pessoal, hoje no nosso Papo de Mercado, a gente tem o prazer de receber aqui o Anand da Casetext. Ele é VP de uma das legal techs que usam a inteligência artificial para mudar o mundo do direito, então é um prazer enorme ter ele por aqui. Como acontece sempre com os nossos papos internacionais, eu vou seguir o papo em inglês. Depois tem a legenda que o YouTube coloca e, se muita gente pedir, a gente pode fazer as traduções também dos papos mais pedidos. É um prazer ter todos vocês aqui assistindo a gente hoje e vou passar para o inglês. Hi Anand, now English part. Thank you so much for joining us in our Papo de Mercado Market Talk series. So a pleasure having you here with us.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you for the invitation. It's always an honor to speak to the Brazilian audience and to speak to legal technology entrepreneurs and lawyers and people interested in this space. So thank you.
Awesome. So we usually, as I explained to you, we usually let our guests introduce themselves, and you definitely have a very compelling story. So please join that with us if you can.
Of course. No, of course, I'd be glad to do it. Please tell me if I'm talking too much. I could talk for the full.
So never an issue.
Okay, so let me just briefly talk about how I got started in legal technology. In the U.S., as I think a lot of your listeners know, after your undergraduate degree, there's 3 years of law school as graduate school. I did that, and I really wanted to be a prosecutor, public criminal attorney, right? And so that's what I pursued very, very strong. I went to Berkeley for my undergraduate degree and then the University of San Diego, both schools in California. I went there for my law degree. And my dream was to become a prosecutor, a big kind of a murder, high crime kind of prosecutor, right? That was my dream. And so I graduated from law school. I passed the bar exam in California, and I started at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. Now, the old, former top of that office, or the boss, is now very famous in the United States. And that's because her name is Kamala Harris, who is now running for president with former Vice President Joe Biden. So she was, back then, this was in 2008, 2009, she was just a local city official. And then she moved up to California Attorney General and then Senator. And now, obviously, she might be the next Vice President of the United States. So that was where I got my start. I quickly realized that, prosecution and being a DA wasn't what I was going to be good at, right? And so I moved from there to the commercial side of things and was a litigator or litigation associate at a large firm for a number of years. I practiced law for about 6.5 years before deciding that I wanted to make a change and go into the business side and go into legal technology. Now, the story of that isn't like I woke up and I had a dream and I wanted to do it. It was not that simple. It started from my second year of practice when I realized that, and this was back in 2010, 2011, so 10 years ago, when I realized that the technology that I was given in law firms oftentimes wasn't very good. It was either some other kind of technology from some other field handed to me and I was expected to use it, or it was technology that seemed like it was created in the 1990s. I mean, it's really bad stuff. It didn't work. It broke. It kept crashing. It had bugs. It was a mess. We
know those. We know those.
And I was working at some very good firms that were spending a lot of money on this technology, right? It wasn't like they could have gotten this level technology and they paid less. This was the best stuff on the market. And so, of course, at that age, and I think a lot of people, I think I still do this now, a lot of people said, and I said, well, look, there must be some good reason for that, right? There's a lot of very brilliant people out there. There must be some reason why this technology isn't better. But as I started trying to design some very basic technology on my own, and I started outsourcing some engineering projects via tools like Upwork, so you could get engineering tasks done in countries like India and the Philippines and Turkey and other places. I started realizing that it wasn't a matter of people just facing problems that were too hard. It's that for whatever reason, legal technology wasn't drawing the best talent. It wasn't drawing people who could solve these problems. And so I, at that point, was thinking and wondering whether I should just raise capital and start my own business. I decided against it at the time. It may be something I do in the future, but I decided against it at the time. And I found a company called Casetext, right? I've been at Casetext for 5.5 years now, almost 6. And I saw a company that was very, very, very early stage. So it was pre-Series A. They'd raised some seed dollars, so a couple $100,000. And I think when I reached out to them, there were maybe 5 or 6 people there. And at that time, I realized that it's companies like Casetext that were really trying to solve the big, hard problems. And while I know that I was very good in speaking and sales and maybe marketing or things like that, my degree is not in computer science or data science or coding or design or all of these very important things. And the idea that I could just start a company on my own is a bit crazy. And I wanted to go and join up with this company of very brilliant people. These are, the co-founders of the company are from Stanford Law and Yale Law. And, we have former Google and former IBM and, on the design and computer science side. And I've been there now for 6 years. We've grown to a company of about 55 people, and we've raised a Series A, we've raised a Series B, and we've raised some other capital there as well. A total of about $45 million US of capital over the course of this business. And the company has grown to now we have contracts, subscription contracts to over 40% of large firms in the United States. So we do a lot of business with the biggest law firms, but we also do a lot of business with solo and small firm attorneys as well. So single attorney offices, 5 attorney offices, 10 attorney offices. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of those subscribers as well. So we're at the high end of the market and the smaller end of the market as far as total number of attorneys in the office.
So the first question I want to ask you about is,
of course,
I've tried that, the crazy path.
Yes.
I tried, I had a legal tech firm. I went to San Francisco to try and raise capital and try to sell technology. And in getting there, I realized that legal tech has kind of a bad name among VCs. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. And it was like the beginning of the big wave, not the beginning, but things happened really fast last year. But I think from 5 years to now, it's like the big wave in legal tech. Lots of legal technology people and companies, amazing companies coming over and doing wonderful things. And even though that happened, people kept telling me that VCs were kind of burned by legal technology, by the legal technology vertical. And the other thing is, lawyers are a really tough sell on technology. So I would like you to explore those two lines a little bit. How do you found those things, and are they true or it's just me? I don't know.
They're true. They're true. It's not just you. It's well known, I think, that is the case. I think it's the case for 2 reasons, right? Number one is the second point you made, and that is that lawyers and law firms have traditionally been very, very difficult to sell to. This is something that I've faced in my personal journey at Casetext. When I first started at Casetext, I'd never sold anything before in my life, right? Nothing of any value, right? And I had no sales or finance degree. I had no marketing degree. I had a political science and philosophy degree from UC Berkeley, and then I went to law school, right? when I first started at Casetext, I was a kind of a generalist. I wasn't a salesman, or I wasn't in charge of the revenue team. Slowly, what happened after the first year or so is that we realized that we really needed to sell products and design and sell products fast if we wanted to have a chance at raising another round of funding. And at that point, it's not like everyone turned to me and said, Anand, you're going to sell. I just started selling. I just started taking it and trying and doing my best. And so often, and this is a message I'll send to all of your listeners, so often being at a startup is just being prepared and willing to not just say you'll do it, but start doing it. And then resources and people will follow. And that's how you become a leader, right? But I learned the hard way what you just described, which is that law firms are slow to buy. They are very skeptical buyers. These are folks who typically do not, they're not accustomed to buying. And in sales land, we say that they are bad at buying. And that is to say that within the institutions, oftentimes they don't know who is going to be in charge of purchasing, how they're going to roll out the product and implement it, what budget it's going to come from, right? Who is going to actually put the money forward to buy it? In a lot of companies, this is very clear. There's a procurement department. There is a clear budget. In law, oftentimes it's not. And so as a result, that slows things down. Now, I think there's a lot of ways to speed it up. I mean, I think I've been able to do a very good job with that. I've sold to dozens and dozens and dozens of the biggest law firms in the United States in the last 4 years, right? So there's ways and tricks around that, right? That's number one. Number two is, a lot of VCs in Silicon Valley really want the next big idea, as in like the next $1 trillion idea. The next $1 trillion idea is self-driving cars. It's Elon Musk's idea, electric batteries. It's rocket ships to the moon. It's all that kind of stuff.
Neuralinks, yeah.
That's right.
Those kinds of
legal tech, and they say,
boring.
Couple $100 billion. What's that, right? And so, obviously, the more pragmatic ones, and so the ones who are more realistic, say, wait a second. Legal is a lot of money. We could make a lot of money, but there's huge amounts of money spent on these $1 trillion ideas, and less amount spent on just the $100 billion ideas. So I think those are the two things that pair up to make it hard.
Gotcha. So that makes a strong statement. And how do you sell tech to lawyers, and how attached it is to a perception that the business model should change?
Big question, and that's a very good question. I'll split that question up into two, Gabriel. I think one feeds into the other. But the first question is, how do you actually sell to law firms? And I think a big part of it that I've been able to harness is that I could speak the language. A lot of buyers in other industries are comfortable buying from people who may not have the exact same educational background or may not be able to speak in exactly the language that you can speak. Lawyers expect you to speak exactly as they speak. One thing that I did very early on is I did almost like an immersion into the core buyers that I was looking at, which was knowledge management professionals at law firms, right? And so I went to conferences focusing on knowledge management professionals, right? Fundamentally, their job, they're kind of a mixture between library, IT and computer kind of infrastructure at firms. And their job is to give the attorneys at their large law firms, right? These are 1,000 attorney plus global law firms, the information they need when they need it, right? That's their job. Now that could be through process, that could be through technology, that could be through whatever it might be. And I read what they read, and I went to the conferences they went to, and I hung out with them, and I befriended them, and I really started understanding what their needs were and what their pain points were. And that took me, 80% of the way there. right? When you talk like them, when you can communicate like them, and you can see the pain that they're experiencing, it gets you a lot of the way there. Now, one of the things that oftentimes people don't understand selling into law is that the old analogy that I use is that the art of enterprise sales, right, selling into big institutions, is selling the same product in 10 different ways. I'll give you an example. The classic example is a car, right? Let's say I'm selling a car to a family. I might, the same car, right, the same Ford automobile. To one person in the family, I might talk about the engine and how fast it goes. To another person in the family, I might talk about how safe the car is and how the airbags are industry standard and maybe best in the industry. And to maybe the kids, I might talk about the entertainment system and how they could watch cartoons in the back while they're on their way to soccer practice. And so it's the same car, but you have to kind of maneuver the sale in different ways. Now, to knowledge management, who are oftentimes the most innovative people at these law firms, the thing that I sold was that this is high tech. This is a high tech product. This is cutting edge. This is the top of the line. And you want to talk about exactly how we made it, the data scientists, the machine learning team, the artificial intelligence engineers that went in to make it, because they love that stuff, right? The partners and the lawyers of the firm don't care at all about that stuff. They don't care how it's made. Their question is more aligned with the second thing that you said, Gabriel, which is our business models are changing. How does this make us more efficient, more profitable, increase what's called realization rate, which I could talk about later? How does this get our numbers and metrics and statistics higher than if we didn't have this product? I don't care how it's made. There was one partner that I was selling the product to maybe 2 years ago, and I kind of forgot exactly who she was and that she was a partner, not an innovation person. And I started going into the natural language processing and the AI and all the tech we use. And she stopped me and she said, "Young man, I don't care if your technology is a ham sandwich. Tell me what it does." And right then I was like, this is not the right audience to talk about all the innovation. So the key thing is to know exactly who you're pointing this technology at, whether this person cares about the engine and how fast the car can go, whether they care about the safety features, whether they care about the design, whether they care about it's on sale, whether they care about the entertainment system, right? What does this person's day-to-day life look like? And how can my product cure what this person feels pain in, right? That is enterprise sales. And I think it works well in the law, albeit, law buying, as we already have discussed, is oftentimes slow and very, very cautious. But Gabriel, it's very clear to everyone in the US, at least, I know I've spoken to a lot of Brazilian lawyers, probably hundreds at this point. And it's very clear that to everyone that the business model is changing. That if you do the same things that you did 10 years ago, you can't expect the same results. You'll make less money, you'll be less profitable, you'll lose clients, you won't get new clients. So I think it's finally working, all of this discussion is finally working in convincing even older, more traditional lawyers that innovation and tech and better processes and better design and better thinking about this is going to be critical to do just as well as you did last year. And if you want to do way better than you did last year, you better get sophisticated with this. You better learn how it operates, and you better use the technology.
Do you have some examples on that? And I want you to talk about the realization index that you said you're going to talk about. Yes.
Yeah, glad to do it. And so some examples here are the following, right? When we take our product to market, and I know a lot of companies like this as well, we thought that if we were to get these innovation people on our side and we were to get these innovation people telling the top partners of the firm, hey, this is the best in class tool. This is the best in class legal research tool. This is the best in class motion writing tool. We thought that among the top law firms in the country, they'd say, yeah, go ahead and buy it, right? Not true, not the case. They all want what's referred to as an ROI report, a return on investment, right? They all want to know, as a case study, as a report, as precise as possible, if we use your technology, how will that enable my law firm to increase the metrics that we find most important? Realization rate is a metric that all of these law firms track. Of course, profitability is a metric they track, and whether they're getting higher billing rates per clients, lower per client, all that stuff. But realization rate is a ratio of how much in billing form you pass on to the client for them to pay you versus how much they actually pay you, right? So 100% realization rate is I say, Gabriel, you asked me to do this work. I've done 100 hours of work and I give you a bill for $100. And you say, well, Anand, it looks all good to me. Here's your 100 hours of work, right? A bad situation, low realization rate is I say, well, Gabriel, I've done 100 hours of work for you. Here it is. Here's the bill. And you say, this is not what we agreed to. And I said, what do you mean, Gabriel? And you say, well, this should have only taken 2 hours, not 6. I didn't ask you to do this at all here. And this over here should have been done a lot more efficiently with the technology that you told me that you have. And so, I'm not happy with this. I'm only going to pay you for 50 hours. And now that realization rate is 50%, right? Realization rate is so important because it's a very elegant metric, right? It is, a very happy client in response to you doing very necessary legal work will say, of course, Gabriel, please, you did a great job. Here's all of the bill that you sent me. Please do more work for me. I love your work, Gabriel, right? Like a bad situation is when they say, this is not good, right? So with respect to our tool, right, we have two core technologies that we're taking to market. One is a brief analyzer called Cara, which has been on the market for 4 years. And one is a litigation automation tool, so an automated brief writing tool called Compose. Now, both of these have very different ROI at different points in the litigation process. They're both litigation tools. But the Cara tool, the legal research tool, allows you to find relevant case law and statutes and authorities more quickly. So imagine if now you're the client, right? And you know that my firm uses Cara, and you know that I'm going to be efficient. And I return, the project that you thought would take 100 hours, I do it in 90 hours. You're impressed with me now. All of a sudden you say, I'm going to pay all 90 hours of that, and you're going to get more work, right? The old business model was when you get work from a client, you stretch it out, right? Take as long as possible, right? That doesn't work anymore, Gabriel. And anyone who tries to do that is going to lose clients. Short term, for this one engagement, they might make more money than they would have before. But immediately when the next case comes to the client, they're not going to give the work to me anymore. They're going to give the work to someone else because they're going to say, at best, Anand is not working very fast. At worst, he's trying to cheat me, and he's giving me a bill that's too high, right? So the business model now for law firms is to do work efficiently, quickly, not rushed, right? But quickly, efficiently, fairly, give the bill to the client and try to get your realization rate up high so that they come back to you and they know that you're efficient and that you don't waste time with work that they didn't ask you to do, and you don't waste time working inefficiently. So that's kind of the business model reality of where we are.
That's really interesting because many people, including Siskin, that you interviewed in your podcast, and we can talk about your podcast later, say that the billable hour is doomed.
Yes.
And what you're describing is kind of not that the billable hour is doomed, but it will be improved. Like people will not. Grunt work was excellent for law firms.
Yes.
It's a great source of income, and you put your junior associates or your interns to do that, and paralegals, and you get a lot of revenue out of that. But that's legal technology is killing that. So the first question is the billable hour really doomed? And a follow-up question is on the partnership model, which is usually based on on all the inefficiencies of the billable hour model, and how are firms tackling those two things?
Yeah, both really good questions. And in order to answer the question, is the billable hour doomed? Let me make the kind of provocative argument that, right under our eyes, the billable hour has been degrading and falling apart decade after decade after decade. Here's what I mean by that. In the 1950s and 1960s, a typical bill that was given from a lawyer to a client would be something as simple as, we, the law firm, did 85 hours of work for you this month. The bill is this much. Wouldn't even say on it, we did this work or that work or this project. It was just, you could put the entire bill on a Post-it note. It was that small, right? Then in the 70s and 80s, you started getting more control and more oversight by the clients. And they started asking for the bills to have some sort of memo at the bottom, right? So you could say it's 85 hours, but at the bottom, under 85 hours, just have a short kind of paragraph that says, well, we worked on this and that and this and that. Okay. Still no billing codes, no billing rates on here, no who worked on it, no sense of exactly what projects were done and what that split of the 85 hours is. Fast forward to the 90s, you start getting it even more granular. Who worked on it? What was the total amount of work done? What projects were done, right? Fast forward even a bit more and you start breaking it up, not just by hour here, hour there, but by 0.1 billable hours, right? That is a 6-minute increment. You're now tracking individual attorneys by 6-minute increments. And now the expectation among law firms is to have bills that are literally broken up by 0.2, 0.3, 0.1, 0.5 per billing attorney, with billing codes and matter codes associated with each 0.1 and 0.3 and 0.2. The purpose of this is twofold, right? The purpose of this, one, is for transparency, but the second and maybe more important purpose is for clients to be able to fight back and say, no, we're not going to pay for that. That's not what I asked you to do, and you didn't do it efficiently, right? Why is this important? And why do I think this answers the question of the death of the billable hour? Well, the billable hour was alive and well in the 1950s, where I just send you a thing that says 85 hours, this is the bill. Because the presumption is that you'd pay the entire bill. You never fought back about the bill. You paid the whole bill. Now the presumption is the opposite. For the vast majority of legal work that is done in this country for big clients, Fortune 500 clients, the presumption is that the client is not going to agree to the bill. The client is going to push back and say, no, we'll pay for these things and we won't pay for these things. In the future, do a better job, or we'll find better attorneys elsewhere. In a way, that kind of represents the slow death of the billable hour, right? If every hour of bill I give to you, you push back, and now across the AmLaw 100, AmLaw 200, biggest law firms in the country, you're seeing realization rates somewhere near 70%. For some tasks like legal research, 65%. Some firms have realization rates of, very good firms of 83 cents, right? So you could make the argument that the billable hour is already dying, right? It's dying a slow death over 7 decades, 8 decades, it'll probably be 100 years, right? But what we're already seeing is clients saying, you could call it the billable hour, billable minute, you could give me anything you want. I'll tell you how much I'm going to pay you because I'm in control now, right? The second point that I'll make on this, because you mentioned Richard Susskind, and he was on my podcast, and it was an honor to have him as a guest on my podcast. He said something that I think was very smart, and it relates to exactly what we're talking about here, and it relates to the billable hour. And he said that the future of law and the future of lawyers as a profession he was talking about the UK and the US, but certainly globally, is not as hourly billers or people who do 1 hour of work and I get paid $100 or $500, whatever. It is as systems builders. It is people who create algorithms, create processes, create systems that can solve problems for clients, right? So the future of what an attorney does at work is going to be less low-level grunt work, as you said, right? Reading a document by hand, writing something on it via pen, scrolling on your computer endlessly on, legal research tools like Westlaw or whatever, right? And it's going to be more systems-based thinking. It's going to be more providing the client the tools to handle a lot of the work and only interfacing with the client and only billing by the hour in rare circumstances, right? I agree with that. I agree with Richard Susskind on that. I think the future of law is in systems building. It's not on actually going in there and reading every document and marking up every document and scrolling through every page. That's a waste of time and money, and clients are not prepared to pay for it anymore.
Well, I can totally relate, especially being a lawyer who did my share of timesheets.
Yes.
And there are many better things you can do with your time than doing those. It's terrible, especially and you use Post-its to keep track whenever you're away from the machine, and it's terrible. Definitely another thing to come. But we still don't know the model that will happen. But if there is a model, but definitely something better for lawyers, not only in terms of how we do law, but how we actually build a client.
There are people working on this right now. If you're interested, I'd be glad to talk about them. There are companies that are trying to solve exactly that problem.
Go on, talk about them.
I could talk about one company, I think, of really, really smart guys called Ping, P-I-N-G. It's called Time by Ping. So what they're attempting to do is create an AI system that essentially follows you around on your work computer. So whether you're in email or on the phone or writing in Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever, it by context and by AI can auto create timesheets and time cards for you I know, right? Exactly. Now, a lot of lawyers are very happy about this, a lot of associates, right? But a lot of partners and firm administrators are very happy about this too, for a much, I think, bigger reason, right? Although I felt the pain of timesheets as well. The bigger reason that they are interested in this is because very frequently, even very diligent attorneys who don't waste time, they're not taking big breaks, no 2-hour lunch, nothing like that. They're at work for 12 hours, but they compile their timesheets and they could only come up with 9.5 hours worth of work, or 8.5 or 7, something like that. With this kind of tool that auto generates all of this for you, it can truly track what you're doing And if you work 12 hours, you could bill the client for 12 hours of work. This could be a big deal. So there's that company, Ping, and there's a number of competitors that are trying to work in this space too. Again, the theme here is taking manual, error-prone tasks and automating them, reducing the error, and making the result more complete and thorough so that the firm could become then more profitable and the bills they could pass on are more fair.
But it's still, we could think about that kind of clashing with what you said, that clients are paying what they want to pay.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
you
right.
can be as efficient as you want in tracking your time. If they think that the value of the work that you did is X, they're going to pay you X. And if X is not what you can charge them, they will find someone whose hours pile up into X.
That's right. That's right. I think ultimately this is about value-based billing, right? Anytime you do work as a lawyer for a client and they don't think the work that you did was worth what they're paying, that's big trouble. That's big trouble in the long term and maybe even in the short term, right? So ultimately, what you just said is 100% right, Gabriel. I mean, if there is a gap between what you are passing on to the client and what they think the value is, even if you diligently worked on what they asked you to work on, and even if you diligently kept track of your hours, ultimately it's your job as the lawyer and your job as the client manager to make sure at all times that the client is looped into exactly what you're doing, why it's important, why it's valuable, and why it's valuable in the way that you're suggesting it is valuable, right? Because if there's any misalignment there, big trouble. I totally agree with that.
And do you see any technology-based examples that solved or are really efficient in solving that gap, like new ways to charge the client?
Yeah, so yes to that. I mean, even before getting to new ways to charge the client, what's been the last step in the progression of the billable hour, right, from the 1950s to now, with no hours listed to some hours listed to more detail to more detail to more detail. Now what you're seeing is this dashboard-based way of letting the client know what you're working on and ultimately billing them, right? So in the 1950s, the client might get a bill every 3 months for 3 months of work, every quarter, right? Now in 2020, or certainly in the future, 2025, 2030, the client, if they want to know, can take a look at exactly what bills were racked up that day, right? And they could call you that day and say, hey, what are you working on, right? That in and of itself is a big deal. I mean, no one in the 80s or 90s could have even imagined a system that allows a client to look at exactly what work is being done. It's almost like, on your phone, like an American Express app or something, right? Or a bank app where you could see, okay, I charge this at 7:05 p.m. right here. Cool, I know that. It's a running tally. That's what a lot of clients are demanding and what a lot of law firms and clients are providing these days. The second part of this, though, is the different styles of billing, right? Brazil is very accustomed to success-based billing, right? In the US, we call it contingency fee billing, right? Where both the client and the attorney bears the risk. If the attorneys and the client prevail in the litigation, then the attorneys recover some part of the money. If they don't, they do not. There's also other forms of billing that are becoming more and more common that we're seeing more and more in the United States. One that I find very interesting is called portfolio-based billing. Here's what that is. Let's say I'm representing a big retail chain and I do all of their personal injury cases. So someone gets injured by a car in the parking lot, someone slips and falls, in the store. Maybe someone eats a bad piece of fruit they buy in the store and they get sick. And, all of these cases that come up all the time, right? People get injured, in these retail stores. Think of Walmart or something, right? It's so big, so many stores, someone's going to get hurt, right? Now, what some firms have done in the past is said, hey, we'll work on your cases and we will bill by the hour. But there's some cases that might require 1,000 hours worth of work, right? A really bad accident, a bad thing. Maybe someone died. Maybe someone, got very, very badly injured. And other cases where someone might have slipped and they didn't really hurt themselves, you spend 10 hours on it, it's gone, right? Before, the firm would bill 10 hours on one and 1,000 hours on the other and get paid hourly. Portfolio-based billing represents Walmart or another company like this going to a firm saying, hey, look, we have 500 of these cases a year. We don't know which ones are bad and which ones maybe will take 5 hours to get rid of. We will pay you for these 500 cases in this portfolio of work X amount of money. And that's it. You handle all of it. If you go under, well, then you've done well and you make money. If you go 2 times over, you lose the money. Then that's how it is, right? What we're finding is that these big institutions, big banks, big retail, big chemical companies, whatever it may be, have a lot of power now in these relationships. And they could simply say, well, we're going to do it by portfolio. And, you 10 firms, give me your bids. We'll go to the lowest bidder. The firm that can do all of these 500 cases, well, you better do them well. At the lowest price, you'll get our work. So you see style.
That's where efficiency brought by technology plays a big role.
100%. 100% right.
Can you talk on that theme? Can you talk about Cara a little bit and how AI can improve and link that, if possible, with the prospects for a junior law professional, which would usually maybe do some things very similar than what Cara does?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me first talk about what Cara is, and then talk about the prospects, which I think, for what it's worth, are very bright for junior legal professionals, right? Let me get into that after I briefly talk about what Cara is. Cara is a tool that we created about 4 years ago that is the world's first artificial intelligence assisted query by brief legal research tool. Here's what that means. What Cara allows you to do is take a legal document, like a brief, like an email, like an article, like a letter, a legal letter, whatever it might be, and take that document, upload it into our system. Our system then runs a number of artificial intelligence algorithms on it and tries to find, based on concept mapping, the cases in our database, which is tens of millions of documents, that are most closely relevant to the document that you have just uploaded into the system. A few very, very good use cases for our tool, and this is the tool that is used by 40% of large law firms in the U.S., right? So a lot of law firms, thousands and thousands of lawyers at all these firms. What it allows you to do is, if opposing counsel files a brief against your client, in order to try to find case law and statutes and articles and other briefs highly relevant to the content of that brief, all you need to do is upload it, and in 3 seconds, bam, you get all of this content back to you, right? So that's a great place to start your legal research, and it does it automatically. The second way to use Cara that is very commonly used in the US is, as you're drafting your own brief, so you're a quarter of the way done with your own brief, and you want to figure out which way to go next, you can take your draft brief and drag and drop it into Cara. You keep working on it after you found cases that Kara has given you. You add those cases in. You are now halfway done. You put it into Kara. And then finally, when you're fully done and you want to file this with the court, you drag and drop it into Kara and see what you've missed, right? Hopefully by the end, the last time you drag and drop it in, there shouldn't be any surprises, right? You should have found everything that is relevant and on point. So it's a tool that as you write, as you read, as you try to understand what things are about, you can you drag and drop any of that into the Casetext product and get a lot of good resources in return. So that is what the tool does. Now, your question is a good one, and it's a question we got a lot, right, early on, which is, will this put junior attorneys out of jobs? My answer to this question is no. And it's no for two big reasons, right? Number one is that, so often when you are writing a brief, the least efficient part of the brief writing process, the part that the attorneys, dislike doing the most, the part that the clients don't want to pay for, the part that you want to just move past most quickly is the legal research portion, right? The part that the client is happier to pay for, the part that attorneys are happier to work on is the creative thinking, the framing of the issues, the kind of almost artistic way of putting together a brief, making a brief clearer, more easy to understand, more easy to read, more interesting to read, right? So often people forget that judges are people too, right? They don't want to read boring things, right? They want to read well-written, interesting things. So number one is what we've seen among all of our clients is it's not that, that they're saying, oh, well, now we could get the brief done in half the time. What they're doing is saying, we're going to spend just as long on the brief, except now every brief is going to be better because we've redirected this time from data culling and scrolling and things that a computer is better at to creativity, interpretation, artistry, the art of writing, which human beings are better at. So the good news, I think, for junior professionals coming up is that law, which almost, in the 90s and the 2000s, seemed like a lot of grunt work, right? Seemed like a lot of work that humans shouldn't be doing. In the future is going to be much less of that grunt work, right? Here's why I'm optimistic for junior legal professionals in the future, and that is the generation coming up is in a lot of ways much smarter than my generation. They're much more nimble. They're more tech savvy. They're more design oriented. They have higher expectations thanks to companies like Apple and Amazon and to some extent Microsoft and others, right? That have given them just slick, beautiful technology, right? I mean, starting with this, right? The iPhone and I'm a sucker for all this stuff. I've got my iPad and I'm on a MacBook, right? I mean, just great technology, right? Great technology. Your Apple TV, no one is ever confused buying something on Amazon, right? Beautifully designed, clear, right? This new generation has come up where that is the norm. They expect that kind of design. They expect that kind of ease of use with technology. I think junior professionals coming up are even likelier to do what I did when I started my career and say, this technology in law firms, in businesses, in the federal government, in state governments is unacceptable. I am going to build something better. I'm going to build something more human-centered. I'm going to build something more beautiful. I'm going to build something that will allow attorneys to do better work. The legal professional of the future is more likely to be a combination of an attorney and something else. An attorney and a systems builder, an attorney and an artist, an attorney and a coder, an attorney and a user experience expert, an attorney and maybe a business person, right? I think there's no better generation to do this than the generation that is coming up that is already doing that. They're not just simple, oh, what do you do for a living? I just do this thing. No, if you look at these kids coming up, in their early 20s, mid 20s, they have side businesses. They've got a YouTube channel. They've got, all these hobbies. They've got all this stuff going on. They could multitask. They could view all kinds of different things at once. I think there's a great prospects for these attorneys coming up. And I think the legal industry is going to be lucky to have them come into legal and make things a lot better.
Well, that's interesting also because you mentioned those multi-sourced lawyers and multitasking people. That's pretty typical of this generation. Right. And so, and will those law firms, the top law firms, it's a talent. Also, it's a talent business. If you attract the good lawyers, then your business is good. If you don't have talent, you'll tank. And right. So, how will law firms attract those guys and keep them? And do you see any relevant changes in the partnership models that are coming from that? I don't know if that's something you came across.
Yeah, so one of the episodes of my podcast is called the Millennial episode, right? And we talk about exactly these things. So I recommend your listeners and viewers to take a listen to that episode. It is with an attorney named JP Box, who is a millennial consultant for these big law firms. And he consults with them and tells them how to retain the best young talent, how to attract the best young talent, how to design partnership models that can keep the best talent, how to let your attorneys work remotely, right? Totally different, very different world we're living in now in 2020, right? Than when I recorded that in 2019 or 18, right? But, and how to get millennials bought into your practice. So let me start off by saying I think I appreciate that. That's the podcast link. I think what we've seen already, and the fact that folks like that guest on my podcast even exist, is indicative of the fact that law firms already have a problem attracting top millennial talent. It's already here. If you're a brilliant millennial and you have a choice between law and tech and finance and maybe journalism and this and that, law is having a hard time getting these young, creative, brilliant people. At least in the US, they are. But law, certainly in the US, is a very high status, high money, high prestige occupation. And so it's always going to get some sets of millennials interested in joining. The problem then, of course, is after they start at the law firm, how do you keep them? How do you make them happy? How do you make them even want to be partners? Right? The partnership model traditionally has relied on someone being at a firm for a minimum of 8 years, maybe closer to 10 or 12 years, and then getting equity partnership, getting profit sharing, and then being at the firm for another 10, 20, whatever years, right? Gabriel, how many young people do you know that stay anywhere for longer than 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, it's rare, right? It's rare. It's not in the culture. It's not in the culture.
It's a lifetime for them.
That's right. And in some ways I'm the same, right? I mean, I've been at Casetext now for 6 years, right? But a lot of people in Silicon Valley jump from job to job to job every 2 years or 3 years. Even people who are in their 40s or 50s, they jump job to job to job. It's just the culture. So how do you keep people at your firm for 10 or 12 years? Well, law firms are struggling with that right now because they're learning that other generations, the answer is just pay them more. If you pay them more, they'll stay. They might be miserable, but they'll stay. I think maybe for the first time, the new generation coming up is saying, I don't care if you pay me double. I don't care. I'm going to go to a job I love more, that is more aligned with my values. It's more aligned with what I want to see in the world. It's more aligned with freedom. It lets me work from, Thailand 1 month and Argentina the next month and New York City the third month, and lets me fly around, work remotely, do whatever I want. And I think law firms are going to be in deep, deep trouble with this as the partnership models, kind of keep heading in that direction. One very insightful article I read somewhere talked about how the partnerships at these firms self-select for some of the most risk-averse people, the people who are willing to stay in one place for a long time, the people who are willing to set creativity aside and just follow the rules, right? If that's the case, traditional law firms are going to be in deep trouble because all of the top people in those law firms aren't going to be the creatives and the artists and the risk takers. They're not going to be like Steve Jobs, right? They're not going to be like Elon Musk. They're not going to be like Jeff Bezos. They're not going to be the big thinkers. They're going to be the kind of rule followers, just wait in line kind of people. And that is potentially very dangerous when you look at adapting to all of these changes. So, the partnership model, I think, could potentially be in some trouble at firms. I think a lot of junior attorneys in the US are very skeptical of the partnership model. They've seen how rare it is to become partner at firms. And most of the young attorneys I talk to in the US are not even really pursuing partnership anymore. They just think it's so distant, and who wants to stay someplace for 10 years? And it seems impossible anyway. So, I think it's going to be trouble. I think it's going to be trouble. And Gabriel, we haven't even talked about the big four yet, right? Deloitte and KPMG and all this other pressure coming in. That's a whole other conversation.
Are they law firms? I mean, they'll say no in some jurisdictions, of course, but that's big trouble. So, Anand, we're getting close to the end of this podcast, video, webinar, this format. And I do have lots of questions I would ask you, and to keep this conversation going. It was wonderful. But one last question. We always ask our guests here to name a book that they find particularly insightful, one or many, it's your choice, and a source of information. It can be a podcast. You already mentioned your podcast. We are going to put that in our recommendations. It's there. I put there in the comments, both on Facebook and YouTube for those watching us. So a podcast or a web series or a documentary or any other source of information that you find insightful.
Absolutely. So I'll go with two books that I kind of guide a lot of my thinking, and I think were very insightful to me. The first one is called The Lean Startup. It is a classic book, of course. I strongly recommend it. It is really viewed as a book that talks about the product feedback loop, right? How to design a product, how to thinly prototype it with very few resources, how to take it to market, how to get input on it, take it back, iterate, take it back to market, and it refers to this cycle. I find that methodology to be very valuable on the sales side of things as well, and the marketing and the business development side of things. So The Lean Startup by Eric Ries is a brilliant book that really guides how I think about how a startup should be run. And I think it applies to people who are starting any sort of small business or new business, whether that's a consulting business, a product-based business, enterprise SaaS, any number of things. How can you very quickly validate a product, quickly find your market, quickly, leanly, in a low-resource way, get product market fit? How does that work? And that book answers that question. I've read it multiple times, and I keep coming back to it over and over and over. The second book that I'll mention is a book called The Challenger Sale. The Challenger Sale is a sales methodology book, but it's more academic minded than a lot of sales books that almost appear like they're trying to sell like a used car or something, right? This is a very academically minded book that talks about how we're entering a new wave of selling and sales that is based on the idea of challenging your client, providing thought leadership, being provocative, not being scared to tell your client or prospective client when they are wrong, being a constant intellectual partner, provocateur, and interviewer, questioner throughout the entire process. This is as opposed to an old sales methodology where the customer is always right. This sales methodology does not say the customer is always right. This sales methodology says you as the seller need to become the expert, and then you need to go to your client and tell them where your product comes into play, and you need to challenge them professionally, of course, so that they can see why your product is the right product. It's a great book. It turns a lot of things on its head, and it empowers sales professionals to really do hard work, learn, become the expert, and then take those expertise and challenge the market so that the market can adapt to the product that you're putting out in the world. So I'll leave you with those two books.
And another source of information?
Another source of information, like a podcast.
Podcast, a video, documentary, any other thing that you might find interesting.
So a podcast and a blog kind of source of information that I go to. I used to go to it a lot more when I was learning a lot of the fundamentals, right? What is the relationship between the lifetime value of a customer and the cost of customer acquisition? What is it? How do you do sales projections, right? How do you determine whether a certain account is going to move forward in your pipeline, right? And where I go and where I went for a lot of that is a site called SaaStr. It's spelled SaaStr. And to those in the Valley, you'll know the acronym SaaS is software as a service, right? So SaaStr is a website, but also a podcast that talks through a lot of these things. It's very nerdy, Gabriel. It's very in the weeds. It's very, very kind of metrics and sales and statistics kind of driven. Oftentimes it's very kind of financially driven. But if you want to develop your fundamentals, if you want to develop an understanding of exactly how mature companies run their sales organizations, best way to hire, best way to bring in a new executive, best way to teach and onboard new representatives at your company, SaaStr is excellent for that.
That's awesome. By the way, I'm rereading also the Lean Startup for
great.
the nth. We're trying to create the Lean law here at Fcmlaw. So we're trying to put using the Lean Startup and the Lean Agile methodology. That.
One other, just based exactly on that, there is a recent episode of my podcast that talks exactly about that. What the Lean law firm looks like. And the episode title is called A Better Lawnmower. And it is with a person named Nikki Shaver, who is a legal design expert and an all-around brilliant person. She works at the law firm, international law firm Paul Hastings. And it's an excellent episode. The title is about how oftentimes, a client may come to you with a problem to say, that says, hey, I need a better lawnmower. And you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions designing this better lawnmower. And it turns out at the end that the client was really asking for their grass to be torn out and for you to put AstroTurf in, right? Like the client had a totally different idea in mind. They thought they needed a better lawnmower. and now you've just wasted a ton of time, right? So how in this lean methodology, in this legal design thinking, do you ask the client the right questions to get around just this concept of a better lawnmower to what the client actually wants?
Amazing. And we're doing well with legal design also at the firm. So it's always good to have this kind of confirmations from other markets and advanced market like the U.S. market that we might be on the right path. This was wonderful, a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all for viewing us today. I'll leave you for final remarks, and please follow the channel, hit the like button and all that, and see the video podcast tomorrow. We have a wonderful lineup of guest speakers here, and I'm just brilliant talk to you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate it, Gabriel. Thank you to you, and thank you to FCM. Thank you to the whole team over there. I'll leave you with just one last remark, and that is I'm so impressed. I've had the opportunity to go to Brazil to present 3 times now, twice in Sao Paulo, once in Rio. And I've just been so impressed with the level of sophistication, the innovative concepts and ideas coming out of the legal tech ecosystem in Brazil. I frequently say in the US how much we have to learn from Brazilian legal techs. And I mean it. I think there's a lot of brilliant ideas coming out of Brazil right now. So, it's an honor to present to you, and it's an honor to share my ideas from the U.S. And of course, I love to hear ideas from Brazil as well. In fact, one of the podcast episodes I did was voices from Brazilian legal tech, and so I had on some folks from Brazilian legal tech. So look for that episode as well. It was a real pleasure to have on a lot of these brilliant voices from Brazil.
Fantastic. Thank you. Obrigado a todo mundo. A gente vai encerrar a transmissão. Curtam o canal, curtam o vídeo, sigam a gente. Um abraço a todos. So we're ending the broadcast.
Okay, Gabriel. Thank you very much.